Well, it's an honor and a pleasure to be joined by David J. Sachs. He's a young classical pianist, and he recently graduated from Brown University, and he's pursuing his studies at Stanford Law School. How you do, David?
All right, how are you, Tom?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. So remind me again, uh, what major did you graduate it from?
So I graduated with a degree in classics on the Brown's Greek and Latin track.
Mhm. Yeah, that sounds fun. Yeah, I also noticed that you got a fire shirt on, which stands for
Yes,
Foundation for
yes.
Individual Rights in Education, right? Yeah.
I doubt they endorsed me, but I'm happy to endorse them.
I hear they do great work advocating for students' freedoms and such. But
Yeah,
before we get to that
yeah,
particular topic, I've already mentioned that you are a classical pianist. So
yes.
when was your most recent performance? Sorry.
It's a fun question. I haven't gotten to perform as much as I might have liked. I wanted to put on a final recital at the end of last semester, but circumstances prevented me from doing so. But I did get to play with some friends
Yeah.
in chamber music last semester. The last one was at a seniors an all seniors concert for graduation at Brown. We played the first one was the Brahms B major trio. Um, but the one I'd like to mention because it was really the greatest experience of my life was playing the Brahms second piano concerto with the orchestra last fall. That was like the last time I really soloed, and it was a great experience. Really, one of my favorites ever because I'd wanted to play the piece for like 10 years. So
Mhm. Yeah, this is how I know if the Brahms is, yeah, the second concerto. I believe it was in the second movement or the third. Uh, the beginning of the second or the third was featured in as an intro in William F. Buckley show, Firing Line.
oh,
So
really?
yeah, so that's how I know of it. But
That's great.
for myself, I'm only beginning to understand classical music, so we have to rely on your expertise on that field. So tell us about how you grew up musically. Were your parents, music aficionados?
So my father also graduated Brown, and
Ah,
he did a degree in music. He was also pre-med. He went to med school, became an ophthalmologist, but he did his degree in music. And the man, I mean, he knows more about music by far than I do. Yeah, he's an excellent amateur musicologist. He's also a very good amateur pianist. And he I grew up with a piano in the house. And there are pictures of me when I was one sitting with him at the piano. And apparently when I was 3 years old, I really, really liked running around the room conducting Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Apparently I also sang before I talked.
Hmm,
I've always felt I've always felt like it was a part of me, and I certainly grew up in an environment that fostered, the development of, one's musical ability or interest. So, and I mean, my father was a great influence in that way. And my mother is not nearly as trained, but I think she's secretly very talented. She remembers all of the lyrics to these songs from the 60s onward.
mhm.
Um,
Wow.
and all of the tunes, she just, so I think they're both very talented. And so I got many opportunities. I grew up in a very musical house where my mother was humming and we would say stop, but not not really. And dad would play and we'd listen to music and he'd tell me about different composers. And I can't say I liked to practice. This is one thing I like telling
Yeah,
people about. Like, I think people, is it your experience that people think people like to practice, or like kids, are like, yes, I get to go practice now. I
no, that's
wonder.
not the case at all.
Yeah, okay, because I was not an exception to that. It's hard to sit down and like be disciplined about something.
Oh yeah.
But I'm glad I was forced to,
Mhm.
as much as I could be forced. Like it wasn't an act of like force. They never threatened punishment or anything. I was cajoled, maybe, I mean, with rational explanations, and I really did love, I really did love music. I mean, it was always in my head. When I skied, I would be in my mind, and so It wasn't that hard to get me there. I think Martha Argerich, who I think is probably the greatest living pianist, had a quote about something about like, once I get to the, it's hard to get me to the piano, but once I'm there, you can't get me to stop.
Mhm.
I'm no Martha Argerich, but I understand that feeling. Once you start getting into something, it's great.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned skiing, by the way, because it is also one of Sir Buckley's favorite pastime. Yeah, he was a skier too. So there's that. Um, do you still do you still keep in touch with the person who taught you the piano?
That's a great question, because it makes me wonder, like, who taught me the piano?
Yeah.
And I mean, the answer is yes, I am in touch with my father.
Sure.
No, it's funny because he was never my teacher, and he never really took on the capacity of teacher. But I remember when I was 5 and I had a little recital, like, student recital that my teacher was putting on. And I just hadn't been practicing. I'd been running around the room or something.
Mhm.
And he sat down with me and he sort of explained, what was what. And then once he showed it to me, suddenly I liked it and I appreciated it. And then in about a week I memorized it and I played it. So yeah. And then I think of it like I had three and a half teachers, really. One of them, my childhood teacher, who made me play Bartuk's and Microcosmos, which are, like little
Oh,
pieces. That was great. I mean, because it was great training, and to this day I think I have an affinity for Bartuk because of it.
mhm.
She unfortunately passed away, but she was a wonderful teacher. The next teacher I had, I think, is still doing well. She's in the city. And then I also got to work with this great contemporary musician when I was in like a contemporary music phase, and everyone should listen to Elliott Carter's Piano Sonata. It's like I think of it as like the great American piano work.
Mhm.
It's like 1945, 1946. I think it's got real world post World War II America feeling. It's a really great piece. I got to work on it with her, and she had worked with Carter, and that was one of the great privileges in my life. I don't know how I got so lucky. And then the third person I worked with was Boris Berman. He's a teacher up at Yale Conservatory, and
Mhm.
by good fortune, I met him at a master class I played for him, and he didn't hate what he heard, and I got to work with him for a while. And he's a great teacher. And it's funny that, because you mentioned musical development, and the musical development's funny.
Yeah.
I feel like my life has been in stages. When I was 11, I heard Prokofiev's first piano concerto, and it's just really exciting,
Mhm.
young, exuberant piece. And I saw a video of Martha Argerich playing it, and I was like, I'm sold. I want to do this. And that made me go to the next level.
Mhm.
And working with Ursula, the contemporary musician Ursula Oppens, on Carter, also made me want to go to the next level. And I'm working with Berman. It wasn't so much want as growing pains. He forced me to go to the next level. I feel like that's how it goes in a lot of disciplines. Maybe it's part enthusiasm, part the allegory of the cave.
Yeah.
It's part
Yeah, of
like
course.
you've got this eros inside you and it's striving to go, but also it's part being dragged up the hill out of the cave.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think you need both.
Yeah. Of course,
So
casually referencing Plato's The Cave, Plato's allegory
I
of the
figured
cave means you are truly are a philosophy major. So do you remember the first piece that you've played successfully from start to finish?
I don't know that I do. I do remember the first time when I played in like a real music program in a real concert. And I
Mhm.
remember what I played there ish. It was I believe it was the Allemande and or the Courant from the Bach G major French suite. And then one of the Shostakovich preludes. I can't remember which, but it's a great one.
Yeah, right.
But that's the Prokofiev concerto. I like to say that's like the first thing I really worked up, the first like real grown-up piece. It's 18 minutes. It's like a concert thing. I was really excited about it.
Mhm. Yeah, right. It's just reminded me because I'm going to correct myself earlier because it was not Brahms's concerto that was featured in Firing in
Okay.
Line with William Buckley. It was Bach's concerto. I think it was
Oh,
that's
that
yeah.
sounds like Buckley.
Yeah, I think it was the second movement of the third or the second. So but you know it when you listen to it.
Mm.
Yeah. What's your earliest public performance when you perform in front of people who are not your family and friends?
Probably when I was 7.
Oh,
Well, okay, technically, I suppose it was, I mean, family and friends. So that was like 5. I would say 7. I think that's the year I competed in the New York State has like this
mm,
teaching association prizes for like students. And so you have to play in front of like a jury, like 2 teachers. And it was a big deal for 7-year-old me. I think that was the first time. And then I think it was the 2 pieces that I mentioned, the Bach and Shostakovich at Interlochen Arts Camp. I went as a junior, I think the category was. Got to play in a program there, and that was public, and that was fun.
okay. Yeah, I'm glad you have good memories about that. So next question.
Yeah.
Next question. What's your favorite piece to play?
It's a great question. I love that question because you said to play. There is a distinction between.
Well, I can ask which is your
That's a
favorite
great
piece to
question.
listen to. So, but
I would love to answer that question.
okay.
I don't. Give me a sec. I'm gonna. I don't know that I can give an exact, precise answer, but lately I've been working up the Rachmaninoff third piano concerto.
Well, okay.
Because I played it when I was 16. It was my first concerto performance, the second and third movements of the piece. Again, extremely lucky. It was a great opportunity. I love the experience. I worked with a great conductor, Tong Chen. And I happened to win a concerto competition. So I've been working it up just because just for fun, because I've got a little time this summer, and it's just it's so much fun to play. I mean, it's very hard, but I think it has a reputation for being very hard. And I would say that I think there is harder, like Bartók's second piano concerto, which is one of my favorite, which is like my second favorite piano concerto, probably period, next to the Brahms concerto that I mentioned earlier. It's handbreakingly hard. I could barely get through it at this point. I could probably work it up if I really had time and effort and inclination to feel my hands feel like they're breaking. But the Rachmaninoff third, it's very hard. But I having learned it young, I think, and the fact that Rachmaninoff was a pianist and he wrote it, and he was a great pianist, by the way. He was a great composer and maybe one of the greatest pianists ever to live, hands down. And he said, but he wrote it for a pianist. And so even though he wrote it for a virtuoso pianist in himself, and so there are some things that it would be better to have a bigger hand than I do. It's really a ton of fun to play. I mean, it's very beautiful. You get to, in playing the cadenza, especially the one that I've written in Ossia, you get to feel like a real virtuoso. It's great fun. It's a great triumph of the piano, I think, that piece.
Yeah. So, what's your favorite piece to listen to then?
I'm gonna say, and I'm gonna give categories. Late Beethoven. So like anything like the late sonatas and onward, including the string quartets and the Diabelli variations, which is a great piano piece. Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. And I would also say the Brahms second piano concerto. I'm biased, of course. I just named several piano pieces, but
Yeah, call me a commoner, but my favorite pieces to listen to on piano are Bach's Goldberg, performed by Glenn Gould, and anything by Chopin. The nocturnes are really good. So, what are some of the challenges that you faced during practice?
I hate to keep quoting philosophers because there are other people eminently worth quoting, but I believe it was Spinoza who said, and I think I remember reading it in the Ethics and thinking, oh, that's where it comes from. Nothing worthwhile in life is easy. It's something like that, and I think it's true. Everything complex or amazing or beautiful or, like generally, broadly speaking, worthwhile. I think it just takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of focus. It takes a lot of concentration. It takes a lot of determination. And for a little kid or even a big kid, I don't think these are like easily supplied. You don't have an abundant supply that you want to go out and like, play and or throw a ball around. And I mean, you can tell by the way I'm talking about this that I didn't do all that much of throwing a ball around, but like, I mean, skiing, for example, you want like adrenaline rushes. And so it was challenging to sit down and really go through all of the details, like the dynamics of phrasing, stuff implicit in what the composer had written, but not, exactly on the page. Do you know what I mean? There's like something, there's something more in a lot of composers. Like Chopin is not just the phrasing or the dynamics. There's like an extra thing you've got to do. And it's just not easy to get yourself to sit down and do that as a kid. At least it wasn't for me. And that's what Berman made me do. And eventually, like I'd say about a year or so ago, the message sunk in, like really sunk in. That was a challenge. Because I got what they were saying, but it was hard to make myself do it. And I sometimes did, but it was hard. The way I compensated was I would take on multiple things at a time. Like I would take on several large, challenging pieces, and that would, in its own way, force me to improve. I liked challenging myself. It was easier work for me personally. I think probably for a lot of people to do more things and see yourself get challenged very, visibly, like technically. Like when I remember, I think Rock 3 was actually one of the things I learned in this particular summer. I was 15. Summer 2015, where I did that and like several other extremely challenging pieces. Do you know what I mean? Like yeah. So, but really getting in there and doing the hard, focused, subtle work was a challenge. I'm better at it now, but I'm no means amazing at it.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I've seen you perform a couple of times. They are recorded on video, and you were quite amazing, at least in my standard.
Thank
And
you.
I cannot
Thank you.
play the piano, even though I've learned it in the past. Yeah,
Mhm.
so you've touched on this before, but are there any, are there, are the composers like, are some more difficult to hone down than others?
Yes,
Hmm.
absolutely. I mean, I'm sure it differs for different people, right? But for me, I think it is universally. I think it is universally given that like Chopin is extremely difficult. So Chopin was also a terrific pianist, but unlike Rachmaninoff and what I'm going to mention in a minute list, he didn't try to write it for the pianist. I mean, there are certain things that the pianist can do that fit the hand that make sense technically. He didn't care about that. So his etudes, I mean, they're a staple of the repertoire, and I still struggle with many of them. But beyond the technical, he is one of the most subtle, harmonically interesting, and complex, and because he's a master of harmony. He's a master of the lyrical bel canto melodic line.
Mhm.
And so what he can do with these two things is out of this world. Just take the Opus 62 number 1 Nocturne. I was playing it the other day, and I played it when I was a smaller child. And that's something else going on that I talked about, this sort of intangible.
Mhm.
I could sense it more than I ever had, which I think is a testament to my maturity. And in sensing it, I knew that when I played through it, I didn't have it. So he's very difficult. Beethoven is also extremely difficult. I find Liszt much easier. And I mean, he's funny because he's known for his extremely difficult transcendental etudes, which admittedly I never really went for. I'm not a huge fan of Liszt. So what I played by Liszt was the piano sonata. I did that first year at Brown, and it was really fun. I felt like I was able to play that piece, and it came naturally. Um,
So let's move on from the topic of music to academia, since this is something that I have some level of expertise on and therefore can weigh in a bit. Um, so the so the theme of this podcast is there are two kinds of people that I often invite in to do interviews. One are musicians, and the others are academics, or those who are well versed in politics and philosophy. And I'm glad to have one that encompasses both fields into the show. Yeah. So tell me about your academic background.
I would describe it as mainly being as coming out to be classics, and I did a lot of classics.
Mhm.
And my major required a lot of classics, which is enjoyed. I mean, the 1,000 level class, the advanced classes in Greek and Latin at Brown were the best I've taken, probably. They're
Mhm.
just really great professors and great seminars, which is part of why I did it. But it comes down to classics and it comes down to philosophy, in which I almost completed a second major.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, you're what I would call a heterodox student, a student who
I think
does
that's
not
fair.
adhere to the sort of like left liberal leaning campus orthodoxy. So, give us an overview of your political beliefs.
Ooh, okay. I would consider myself, I mean, I think labels are fluid, and indeed, I would like to plug No Labels, which is a national organization for students that had a chapter at Brown where people of different stripes came together. And throughout my time at Brown, that was the only club I attended regularly, because I really would describe myself as heterodox, but politically, I come out to something like slightly right-leaning liberal. I subscribe to classical liberalism in many ways. I mean, fundamentally, my political philosophy is liberal. I agree with Charles Larmore, who has a really interesting book out, What is Political Philosophy, from a couple of years ago, about how we are going to have different metaphysical and moral beliefs, and that's fine. And we need a political system that can play host to them, that understands this and still, proceeds. I mean, granted, he might take issue with the way I just characterized it. He had a habit of doing that, at least when it came to Kant. but um, something like that, and it's also a Rawlsian principle, I think. So I agree with many of the foundations of political liberalism, simply from an epistemic standpoint, and that, like, we don't really know what the good is. We're trying to pursue it, all of us, I think, and that's going to require different viewpoints.
Yeah.
So from a utilitarian perspective, certainly, and from I would also justify it from a different perspective, which I don't know whether to call it moral. I think it probably is. It's natural law, which is like, violating somebody's right to free speech and their right to be themselves. And Mill talks about it, I think, in chapter 3 a lot. And I think Locke certainly indicates it with his natural law doctrine. But, like, I think freedom of conscience and freedom of being is the fundamentally important thing. Now, granted, I think that liberalism leads us to want to have a spirit of camaraderie in society, care about one another. I really like John Locke. The second treatise is really cool. But I think fundamentally, freedom of conscience is super important, and also the idea that we are extremely fallible, as human beings, is central. And so that's what leads me to a liberal political philosophy. But my liberal political philosophy, though, it has to honestly be described as slightly right-leaning, because I am kind of a markets guy, not religiously. I know libertarians. I'm not as extreme on some issues, such as gun rights, as they are. I definitely got into an argument, one or two of them, in light of school shootings. But in general, I would lean I would lean in Britain. I guess you might put me in either in the Liberal Democrat or Conservative Party. I'm probably somewhere between the two of them. In America, I wouldn't know.
Mhm.
Heterodox is a good way to put it.
Yeah, it does place you aside, or outside of the more left liberal leaning college university space.
Brown, I was definitely a conservative, just compared to the rest of the population.
Yeah, so yeah, you would probably be seen as conservative by many of your
I
peers.
was. I was.
So yeah, tell me about
Although not by the right leaning community at Brown. They they were very divided on me.
yeah, so tell us about your experience getting on with your peers over there at Brown University. Were there were there occasions for like political debates either outside or inside the classroom context?
Yes.
I thought so.
Um, so one thing I'm going to mention while you mentioned the classroom is one thing I really did not like was when professors needlessly brought Donald Trump into examples in which they had an opportunity to denigrate him.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I have plenty of criticisms of the former president. Not a huge fan. Not as big as detractor either, but not a huge fan. But yeah, like bringing him into an example, for instance, I think it was like categories, and it's like Donald Trump was a president. He was a very bad president, but it's like you use the president who you didn't like as a philosophical example. I mean, come on, man. Yeah, there were people in that classroom. I mean, maybe not in that classroom, but there might well have been people in that classroom who voted for him, or at least in my case, who didn't think he was the worst thing ever to happen to the world as we know it. It just felt gratuitous, and I mean, this wasn't a huge thing in the disciplines I happen to be in, because classics still is it's really about the subject, and about classics, and about in my case reading Pindar. That God, Pindar's the best, by the way. Or reading Spinoza.
Mhm.
But it snuck in there a little bit. Definitely, there was one interesting instance in not medieval. I shouldn't. It was like early medieval, the court of Charlemagne. There was a class taught by this amazing professor, Joseph Pucci, best professor ever. I mean, the man single-handedly like fixed my writing.
Mhm.
Anyway, so there was a debate over Duoda, who was one of the few women writing in that time, or like around that time. And she's a very, very interesting person. And people were making comparisons to second wave feminism. And that brought up a debate of feminism in a medieval Latin class, which was pretty interesting, but it was handled fine. Outside the classroom is more interesting.
Mhm.
In that particular instance, I did say something slightly negative about fourth wave feminism, and I did elicit a slightly offended response from one student. The rest of them just thought it was funny.
Okay.
Not because it was like a funny topic, but because I said something that was funny.
Mhm.
At least they thought it was funny. So I'm glad they thought it was funny. But and of course so it's a little tricky. I think it gets worse depending on different circles. But in my academic environment, we usually skirted the issue. I brought up the nuance of the gun issue at one
Mhm.
dinner party, I think, and
Yeah.
that did not go well. Half the attendees thought the Second Amendment should be abolished, and I quickly didn't say anything
Yeah.
because I don't think the Second Amendment should be abolished, and I
Oh,
just there was not going to be nuanced debate. But I mean, in academia at this point, it's an occupational hazard. Um,
it is.
Outside the classroom, in my first year, I had a number of debates, and I had to say it might have just been the people I found, but I had wonderful debates
Mhm.
that changed my perspective, even in some cases. One on Israel Palestine. It's not that I changed my mind and I'm suddenly anti-Israel. I'm very pro-Israel.
Sure.
But it was nice hearing from the person who lived in Lebanon and had a very different set of experiences and perspectives than I did. And we did manage to have a conversation. And that to me shows the beauty of heterodoxy.
Mhm.
I mean, hell, the beauty of the Heterodox Academy, where we understand that people have different perspectives and viewpoint diversity is an essential part of the conversation inside and outside academia, but especially for them inside academia. I think it's the beauty of the university. It's something that's supposed to happen outside the classroom too. I will say that many of my friends were met through sort of heterodox organizations like No Labels. I casually attended multiple clubs like that. And so my friends, with a few music exceptions, tended to be heterodox thinkers, some of them more right-leaning than I am, for sure.
Yeah. So I went to school in Canada, so that's apparently is disastrously more liberal than the United States at this moment. What I find, sharing the classroom and sometimes gaining and losing friendships with these people is that they seem to believe that their kind of political framework, however, incomplete they are, is the only one that's valid. They seem to be like the only set of values that should pervade this world is one that doesn't consume animal products or respect to all genders, as in more than two, or the kind of this fervent 24/7 concern about social justice, whatever that means. And yeah, they don't seem to make the leap us to saying that there are other good people that believe in other things, like say the free market is not exploitative, or the West is the best, and we should respect the classics, and we should value debate and open inquiry and such, which obviously brings us to how you came into my radar, and that was during a Uncommon Knowledge interview where Peter Robinson interviews Glenn Lowry, the great economist and your mentor. So how did a classic students come across an econ professor?
Well, you talk. It's great that you talk about the fact there are other good people out there with different beliefs. Because when I was 16, it was during the Trump phenomenon, then somewhat after. I come from a household of like Roosevelt era Democrats.
Mhm.
That's how we always thought, and so we always cared about income inequality and like the working class and like that. And then we saw Trump. Now, say what you will about the guy, and again, I've got plenty of bad issues of the working class. I mean, he gave voice to the concerns we'd had and felt were unaddressed by President Obama and by Secretary Clinton during the election. It was just eye-opening for me, because I realized, wait, what's this guy doing talking about that? He's in the Republican Party. And then what happened in Berkeley in 2017 with Milo
Shapiro, right?
But well, I think he got to speak there. No, I'm thinking of Milo when Antifa came and like threw bricks through windows and started fires.
Yeah,
it was horrifying. Now, granted, Milo's I don't really think he has much intellectual weight.
Yeah,
that's a nice way of putting it. But they shouldn't have thrown bricks or started fires.
Mhm.
And that made me aware of a serious problem on campuses that like we weren't having these conversations, because I took the ability to ask impertinent questions to my teachers, impertinent in quotes, like, but why is this the case, or why do you think that? Like, I took it for granted. The process of free inquiry, I took that process for granted. I thought, of course there's free inquiry, that's how things work. And so to see such a devastating event on a college campus and like the furor and backlash and so many spheres regarding it was a wake-up call for me. Also, I had, I think, a naturally curious reaction to it, which was, why do they hate him so much? What is he saying that's so hateful? And I listened to some of what he said, and that led me to listen to more intelligent people on the right. And I realized, wait a second, maybe the gender pay gap, I remember, was the issue where I had a come to Jesus moment. Wait a second, maybe it's not 70 something cents on the dollar. Maybe it's more complicated than that.
Mhm.
Comic teacher next year confirmed in fact that it probably is more like 95 cents when you adjust for certain things according to the Harvard study done, right?
Yeah.
So it's just, and I just realized there was more than one side to the story. And in fact, in many cases, the one given by the so-called right made more sense to me. So I was gravely concerned about the state of discourse on campus at that point, and I wanted to make sure that I could expand my views. And so I stumbled, and so I saw this weedy internet video. Rob Montz, who was a Brown University alum, and he did this video of his his alma mater when I was applying for college, came across it, and I saw this crazy intelligent guy, extremely intelligent, articulate, passionate, and saying stuff that just I made so much sense and clicked with my very soul. And it was Glenn Lowry.
Mhm.
And so I started listening to his podcast, which is a very interesting podcast, and he's just such an intelligent guy, and he really, this is a theme we talked about at the Heteros Academy conference in Denver in June, but he's a great listener too. He's a great speaker and he's a great listener, and this guy understands what people are saying. He tries to make sense of it. He asks good questions. This guy is like, I mean, he epitomizes sort of the process of free inquiry,
Mhm.
which requires a certain charitability, I have to say. I mean, Don Tomasi and I are fond of calling him Socrates in the flesh. He's the other one who said it. I remember meeting him, and he looked at me like, John Tomasi, Glenn's Socrates, isn't he? Like that. And I was like, yeah, I get that. So anyway, but that's how I became aware of him. And then in October, I knew he was coming back from France because he was talking about it with McWhorter. And I emailed him and I said, hey, can I stop by your office and can we have a chat? And he was like, okay, sure. I don't know how I got through, but I did. He talked, and we'll talk. He and I'll probably talk about this more right about it, because now that we're done, now that we've finished that phase of our working relationship. But I remember walking in, he was tired, he was jet lagged, and suddenly we just started talking, and he started saying things that just made beautiful sense. And he said, hey, read this. He saw something in me, I don't know what, from that meeting, but he did. And I came back, we talked about his this, which was self-censorship in public discourse, his 1994 essay. It's a must read. It is a must read. It's a brilliant use of game theory and other concepts, of which I, a humble humanities guy turned law student, am unaware. But it's a wonderful discussion of how self-censorship works, and the consequences for discussion, what we think about when we're talking to a certain audience, how we have to be aware of multiple audiences, or how politicians are aware of multiple audiences. You get the idea. It's a must read. But we talked about that, and then we just kept talking, and then we kept talking, and then I think he appreciated my humanities background. I mean, I was already an avid classics nerd, and I was just obsessed with the apology, and not the allegory of the cave yet. That was later. But I was just obsessed with the apology. And the apology was core to like a mission he and I held dear, which is, promoting free inquiry.
Mhm.
And I mean, I think that brought us together, because the man may be a social scientist and a world-class economist, but I think he's deeply humane, first of all, and I think he likes reading books too,
Mhm.
is the way I would put it. He likes reading books too, and so we got to read books together, and that was something we wanted to do, and then we did it. But yeah, so that's how I met him.
Well, yeah, couldn't say it better myself. Glenn is a rare kind of thinker. He's incredibly brilliant and incredibly courageous as well. And he deserves
Yeah.
every ounce of success that he's getting right now. Yeah.
I think he's having his moment.
Mhm.
I think having his moment. I think people are starting to, to appreciate this guy and see him again, and he is coming. And I really am looking forward to seeing the public engage more and more with Glenn Lowry, a
Yep.
man I revere personally and intellectually.
Awesome. Yeah, so the course is called Free Inquiry in the Modern World again. And well, Glenn, so far, Glenn has not published the syllabus yet, and I'd be very curious to check it out. And I've tried a few Google searches, but it hasn't popped up. But according to the interview that he gave, here are some of the texts featured in the course. Aeropagitica by Milton, I believe On Liberty by John Stuart Mill, Plato, of course, The Republic, I'm guessing. Václav Havel's essay, The Power of the Powerless, and this is a kicker.
Yes.
My Grandfather's Son by Clarence Thomas. Oh boy, I'm sure.
Yes.
I'm sure that one would not be in any class syllabus after whatever is going on in the abortion debates right now.
I
But
think it's a great text, by the way. I really loved his memoir. I don't know that I agree with the Chief Justice. Sorry, not Chief Justice. I actually agree with the Chief Justice on this one.
oh, okay.
I don't know that I agree with Justice Thomas's opinion in Dobbs, but I really liked his memoir. I think he's this guy who really gets reviled in a way that is possibly unnecessary.
Yeah.
Not possibly. It is unnecessary. I don't know why they hate him so much. I don't get it. He seems like a smart and humble guy from his memoir. I mean, yeah, that's all I would say about that.
Yeah, they've, the left or liberal side have, well, for one, Anita Hill happened, and anyone who believed in Anita Hill still believe that, Clarence Thomas did this thing, which I don't. The way I remember it, she failed a polygraph test. So, and there was no one to corroborate her words. And secondly, the left liberal side has never, sat well with Clarence Thomas, a Black man being a conservative, being one of the most powerful jurists in the land. And, they would prefer someone of a more liberal bent, I'm guessing. But yeah.
Yes. I mean, I don't really know how to comment on Anita Hill because I wasn't alive. And I mean, granted, that's not the best excuse, but I just would say that I don't like when people say, and I can't remember who it was, but I don't like when people say there are two rapists on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, me neither.
It's a demonstrably unproven allegation, and it destabilizes the legitimacy of the court. So that's all I'll say about that. And on the second point, I mean, I think Professor Lowry has gotten flack for at least once. I mean, he weathers it beautifully, but for thinking the wrong way. I do think that this might come down to his self-censorship essay and related themes, about communities policing themselves. I don't, in terms of speech and expression or demanding a certain, I don't know. I'm not certain about it. I know that there's even a phrase for Jews who are against Israel, self-hating Jews. And I don't like that rhetoric very much at all. In general, I don't like it when, it's the people who call Clarence Thomas an Uncle Tom or something. I think that's deplorable. I really do. I think that the man thinks for himself, and I think that's something that should be applauded. And if you read his memoir, you'll see sort of how he came to certain realizations. And I mean, you may not agree with it. You may think that it goes too far. I mean, when he's talking about. I mean, obviously, I could change my mind about this when I go to law school. But talking about the 15th Amendment and limiting the doctrine of that's something face that just doesn't sit right with me. But that doesn't mean that he's a horrible person or a bad thinker or an untrue and ungenuine thinker.
Mhm.
And so I think that's why all these issues that we just talked about in brief, that's why we included the memoir, because it's a curious case study for free inquiry. Why do you get smeared this way? How do you get smeared this way? What dynamics were at work?
Right. So as I was saying, anyone who's pissed off at the recent Dobbs decision with Alito and Thomas and co. should pick up the memoir "My Grandfather's Son" by Clarence Thomas. Actually, started listening to it when they were announced that someone leaked the draft, and I believe that it was Alito who wrote it, but Justice Thomas, I believe agreed with, and he he is probably one of the most maligned Supreme Court justices. So I thought, hey, why don't I just pick up the book? It's an audio book, so he read it, and it's amazing. So back to the course with Professor Lowry, which you were the TA of. From what
Yes.
Glenn said, it was conducted in a seminar kind of format, and I'm guessing that the texts are up for discussion, and then Professor Lowry would ask questions, and the students, they would engage in spirited debate. And so, one question, I'm guessing, were you part of the committee, two-person committee that selected the text aside from Professor Lowry? And two, how would you assess the discussions?
I was part of the two-person committee, and I did it together. You can probably notice my influence with the Plato. So yeah, and he and I would ran the class together. He was, of course, the leader. He would ask the questions, he would engage the students, and he would allow me sort of this role of gadfly, where
Mhm.
I would sometimes come in and I would ask further questions.
Yeah, I believe you're saying that you were participating as a gadfly role, and then the screen just froze, and then I was booted off the Zoom chat.
Yeah, so I mean that's what he called it. And once or twice we switched roles
Mhm.
because he envied my my gadfly role, and he let me take a little charge.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I asked the students questions. Sometimes I sometimes gave my own view, in service of pushing the conversation along. We ran it together. He was I mean, he ran the course, and I helped him in. I mean, I was super lucky for my part because I got to help like facilitate the conversation a little bit in the role of gadfly. And the conversation, I mean, the students are brilliant. In this particular iteration, we got, because we did it twice, but in this particular iteration, we got students from multiple political views and multiple, like philosophical views, and we had to engage with some of the hard questions of free inquiry, like when does free inquiry and somebody's personal like dignity, how do they clash? How do we sort that out? And other times we were just trying to make sense of these great texts, like it's particularly in the first half of the class, let's say, where we were reading, Clarence Thomas came at this in the second half as like a sort of case study.
Ooh.
But the text you mentioned previous, to his like Plato, which I should say we read the Apology and we read from the Republic,
Oh.
and Mill and they were the first part, and we were just trying to make sense of these texts first and foremost, and they'd be required to write a weekly piece on these texts, sort of trying to get into some of the arguments they were making, and that was fun to read and engage with, and sometimes brought up their argument work from their written work into the text, into the conversation. And it was really fun. It was really fun. It was light. I know I went for a somewhat informal approach at times. I felt it made people more comfortable. But obviously, it all came down to Professor Lowry's sort of questions, and he would always make sure we stayed with true to the free inquiry focus of the class and conversation. So we would bring these we would understand these great texts, and then we would try to understand their implications for free inquiry, and that was really the goal of the class. And so, Mill, I mean, obviously is very relevant to that, and the apology is, I don't know your thoughts on the apology, but I'm sure you have them. But every time I read it, it makes me think about the issue from a different perspective. I mean, on its face, the unexamined life is not worth living, and don't punish this guy for being the muops, the gadfly, Socrates. It's like it's a public service, but then it almost forces us to get into deeper and deeper questions, like, why free inquiry? Why is this process so important? And I mean, Plato ties it to, the pursuit of knowledge, the highest thing we could do. I mean, it has huge metaphysical implications. So it's a very, I mean, Plato is like, I mean, I think for many people, really fascinating guy, and the apology was a gateway for us into these questions, and an attempt to get them to think about the metaphysics of it as well at the beginning.
Mhm. Yeah. The way I see
Great
it,
kids, great opportunity. Academic.
yeah.
You're,
I know that the notion of academic freedom is very important in the academia, and that in itself has come under fire for many reasons, all of them political. And the way I see it,
yes.
universities are probably the only place where you can engage in the free exchange of ideas and debates about ideas for the sake
Yeah.
of ideas themselves. Once you get into politics, the practical use of ideas
Yes.
becomes paramount, and I believe that in in a university setting, that's the only place where you can really actually debate about the value of communism versus the open market. So
Sure.
yeah, and I think because of this detachment that the university seems to have abandoned the mission of uh, exchanging and proliferating ideas for their own sake, that it is in danger, and is creating very, very bad political creatures, very bad social citizens. And so I'm glad that a course like free inquiry in a modern world happens. So yeah, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the state of universities these days, having been through that system once and will be again.
Oh yeah, right. I forgot about that. No, no. The closing of the American mind,
Yes, Alan Bloom.
not the American mind. The Coddling of the American Mind is an important read too. It was it is an important read, but the Closing of the American Mind, I think people know less. I'll
Mhm.
tell you, we included it in the course, and
Yeah.
we got a number of interesting reactions. Most people were like, "Oh my God, how dare you say that about rock music?"
Oh yeah. Yeah, he was.
I
He
read a
didn't like.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He didn't like rock music at all. Yeah, I was just saying. Alan Bloom.
He did not like rock music at all. And I'm going to tie it into the point on this question. But yeah, I read a wonderful student paper about how, like, oh my God, I'm paraphrasing. Classical music just doesn't, it's harder it doesn't speak to the soul as easily. It's rarefied. It's, whereas rock music gets right to the populist pulses. And it's like, yeah, there's something to that. It's great. It's a great student paper. A very, very interesting student. Obviously, I don't agree, but I really, Professor Lowry and I enjoyed reading it. He definitely liked seeing my reaction to it because he knows that I'm, I like my classical music. Anyway, I think that book really does speak well to the kind of souls that the university is cultivating. Maybe.
Yeah.
I'm not saying in every case. I've met many kids who are not, corporate suits.
Mhm.
But I think there has been a spiritual decline. I mean, personally am not a huge believer in God. I am not religious.
Mhm.
Although I must say, I did speak to a couple of, no, dear.
Yeah, sorry, we were a bit, we were interrupted for a bit. You were saying that you were not religious, but you did speak to,
Right. I'm not religious. Although I must say, I really do think that I've spoken to Orthodox Jewish rabbis, and they're just really intelligent, interesting people, and I do feel a certain spiritual connection to the Jewish faith. I mean, I am culturally and ethnically Jewish, but I one thing that I really worry about with atheism is that nothing is going to fill the proverbial God-shaped hole in one's heart. I think there has been something of a capitulation to like students' whims and desires at the outset, and like the administration capitulates to the students. I mean,
yeah,
Ray Kelly was in 2013 was kind of an incident of this. I mean, the We the Internet video on Brown that I referenced earlier has a scene like this where they're talking to the provost and students are like making demands, and I don't think that's productive. I think students need to be fostered and nourished and helped to grow by professors who are sympathetic to that purpose. And sometimes, sometimes this love, sometimes love is tough love. You need rigor. I mean, I can tie a spiritual decline to a lot of what's happening, and sort of, I think you could tie that to rejecting the West. Not saying the West is the only source of spiritual good. I'm saying that it is a source, and for me, it's been the most important source. Classical music, by which I mean like, the Western canon of art music, Bach to, I was going to say Busoni, but it's past Busoni, like Ligeti even, like this is a canon, this is art, and it can speak to the soul in ways that Mick Jagger just can't.
mhm,
I am a fan. I'm a fan of some popular music. It's just
mhm,
we know it's not the same.
yeah,
It just doesn't do the same thing. It doesn't,
mhm,
it doesn't push you in the same way. And one thing that I think Bloom even talks about it, but it's a point that I like to extrapolate from Bloom, is like the idea of a hero. The entire Closing the American Mind is from the so the importance of the hero, I think, comes down to, and I'm talking specifically about, like, again, the Greek hero and the Iliad. The Iliad is my favorite literary text, probably, but I think it comes down to individuality, and I think people who are drawn to rock music, or like, in general popular music, that can, it's loud, it's got a distinct beat, and you feel like you're part of something. You feel like you feel a populist impulse. I get it.
mhm,
But I think people who are drawn to that don't find the same mental nourishment, or like, like spiritual depth, for lack of better terms. But like, I think we've lost identity, and we've lost the development of the individual, because we are ceasing to examine not only the notion of a hero, but like just important ideas in personal development as it is explored in literature and in music and in philosophy. I don't think we give ourselves that opportunity to grow, and that's part of what the university is supposed to be about, from a more rigorous perspective than like, oh my god, the feelings on the soul, because it's university. But I think that's what a lot of what the university is supposed to be about, in terms of that nourishment and providing the literary, musical, etc. perspectives. And I don't think we're doing that so much anymore. We've de-emphasized it, and we've replaced it with an idea of like working for, to make the world a better place. I think making the world a better place is great. I think social justice is terrific, with a caveat. Big caveat. The big caveat is that social justice should not be understood as a particular left-wing ideology. A left-wing sort of, I guess, liberal in the sense of it's interested in overthrowing social structures, but like I don't consider it liberal. I don't think we should even give it the title of liberal. It is a left-wing impulse, and that is what's being embraced in the university. And I think that's fine. Like people should have like left-wing views if they want, if that's how they tend. I think we need a mix of views in the public sphere to, for things to work. But it shouldn't be dominant at an educational institution. When you give up education in the pursuit of knowledge for a particular ideology, especially a political one that sort of will absolutely become interested in like political winners, political losers, and like you were talking about in Canada, cease to imagine that good people can have different views.
Yeah.
Because this is the only view, and if you're not there, how dare you? What's wrong with you? You are an outcast. That is a huge problem. So I am fine with social justice in this, in a sense of a scorecard, where we are interested in making the world a better place, and we can do so through multiple perspectives. You can sort of hear John Haidt and John Tomasi talk about this, and I think that's interesting. But even so, I think the universe is not supposed to be about making the world a better place. I mean, it certainly can be. It's certainly part of it, but I think it's really about personal development and becoming your best self. It's sort of a phrase that's been co-opted by certain circles, but I think it's kind of true. Developing yourself, and that's what I tried to do with my course of study, because I felt that these texts, literary, philosophical, really allowed me to grow and to think better.
Yeah, I understand. A few points in response to that. Again, I'm not really disagreeing with any of them, but I'm just adding to some of it. There's an essay by Thomas Sowell that I read a while ago. It was published much longer than that, where he recalled an incident in Cornell University where a group of students protested the university for many reasons. It was in the 60s. And the university faculty basically acquiesced to the students' demands, either partly or fully. And that itself kickstarted this whole trend where the administrators becomes, just a vessel for the students' demands and heated emotions and attitudes and such. And that brings me to how, I enjoy popular music. I enjoy classical music too. But I find that there is, among those who enjoy popular music, especially rock, a repudiation of classical music. One of the most well-known rock songs is Chuck Berry's "Roll Over Beethoven." So, Beethoven is obsolete. Here comes the new kids now and such. And I think the repudiation of rock music and the fervent embrace of the repudiation of classical music and the fervent embrace of rock music, it's connected with the rejection of ideas, like the contemplation of ideas and the adoption of attitudes. And that is what I'm seeing in universities at this moment. It's not the ideas that are guiding student activists. It's the attitudes that the young are the symbolizes progress, and and they bring progress with them, and they reject anything and everything that older generations have to offer, even the good among as well as the bad, and as well as the persuasion that we will not be falling into the same trap of, say, prejudice or small-mindedness, and of course religiosity as the older generations, and therefore we'll reject all that. But what they don't forget is what they don't seem to remember is that, well, that's the message of every successor generation in response to what they think are iniquities of the previous generation. narrow-mindedness and prejudice and all of that are human vices, and they are not going to go away with every passing generation. We have different ways, better ways of thinking about those, but that doesn't mean they're going to go away. Yeah, and with that little response of mine, we should bring this interview to a close, and I really enjoyed it despite the very bad internet connection that we're sharing. So final question, David Sachs, what book or books are you reading right now?
I am reading the Catcher in the Rye because I'm reading it because I have been in the process of writing 2 books. I published my first fiction book in January, and I've drafted another. And someone said that the draft kind of reminded them of J.D. Salinger. And I've always been a fan of 9 stories. I read them when I was very young. Okay, it's time I finally be the Catcher in the Rye. And I've been perennially also working on Swan's Way. I'm about a third of the way through.
Wow.
It's a tough one to read, but I'd encourage people to do it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So you should probably send me a link to that book. I like to check it out, and I like the audience to check it out too, which brings me to the actual final questions, which is where can people find your work? I know that you have a Substack page, and aside from that,
yes. I don't have my stuff well organized, it must be said. Why don't we do this? So I do have a Substack page. That's where I've been publishing lately. I wrote one thing in June. Why don't I include a link in my Substack to my YouTube channel?
Sure.
And I'll also maybe I'll include a link to my book. And I'll also send those things to you. But yeah.
Of course. Yeah. Look forward to
that.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a great pleasure meeting you, David Sachs. Not to be confused with the, I guess, uber famous businessman, right? I think there's a venture capitalist that's
There's David O. Sachs.
Yep. And you're David J.
I'm thinking maybe I'm gonna have to go by David J. Sachs for a little while. Just to differentiate myself. We'll see though. We'll see who'll be most famous one day. Okay. But yeah, no, it was a great pleasure.
Yeah, and I look forward.
By the way, I agreed with your last.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, agreed with your last.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
And I look forward to after you graduate from Stanford Law School, so we can see that cheery disposition of yours getting crushed by the liberal orthodoxies of that school. So yeah, it was a.
Oh, I'm sure that's so bad. It's gonna be interesting. I'm looking forward to discussions of constitutional interpretation for sure.
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna be interesting.
Congratulations, by the way, and wish you the best come September.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to the experience.
Awesome. Take care, man. Oh, and happy 4th. Assuming that you're one of those few, white people remaining who still think that America's a good thing that happened.
Do I think America's a good thing? Yes, I think America is great. I think that, I was talking about my love of John Locke.
Mm-hmm.
I think America is the imperfect realization of the natural law principles that John Locke enumerates, and other people too. But I think this is the one place where we have always had a promise of we the people and natural rights being enshrined, our natural rights being enshrined in the government. And while it's imperfect, I think it's a great experiment that we need to keep at. So yeah, I think for those reasons, America is the greatest country in the world. Go America.
God bless America. All right. Awesome.